Conversations across time, conversations across.
I'm Mark Hoffman, proud member of the Conversations Across Time family and a retired history teacher. These are the times that try men's soul. These words were written by Thomas Paine, the character I play on this evening's show. They were written to rally the colonists against the tyranny of George III of England. Also on the panel with me tonight are Spartacus, the slave gladiator who organized a revolt against imperial Rome; Ida B. Wells, the African-American journalist who fought for women's rights and was instrumental in getting anti-lynching laws passed in the United States; and Horace Greeley, the founder and editor of the New York Tribune, whose abolitionist editorials led to the passage of the 13th Amendment and the end of slavery. Tonight's show deals with tyranny, fascism, and the culpability of the press in allowing these tyrannical forms of government to rise up in our country. Stay tuned for an educational and provocative show.
We are coming back to a very important point. Mr. Horace Greeley has already challenged the public, and Horace Greeley, as you know by now, is probably the closest comparison to a 19th century version of our patron, Edward R. Murrow.
The slogan that has been attributed me, "Go West, young man," I can't say I originated it. However, I did follow my own advice, and I went to the Utah Territory to interview no less a figure than Mr. Brigham Young, who was the leader of the Mormon Church. And
which, may I just interject, because for the purpose of making certain that we are keeping this clear for our audience, because at that time, the Mormon Church was viewed as this far-wing, scary kind of doctrine.
yes, that is true.
Sort of like what's happening
to
today.
all of us.
Sort of like what's happening today, and how the Muslim community is viewed by the politicians of today.
From my perch in heaven or hell, because some people think I might have gone to hell because I was a deist, I watch your show, Ms. Crawford, and I remember you had a show with Brigham Young on it,
Yes.
dealing with that very same issue about religious persecution.
Yes.
After Joseph Smith was murdered, you actually led, once you became the second president, you led your followers to Utah in search of a place where you would not be persecuted.
Correct.
There are some who liken that experience of you leading the Latter-day Saints across the desert to Utah. They compare you to Moses. So the President of the United States appointed you as the governor of the territory of Utah. Now, in wanting to build the Church of Latter-day Saints, you got your followers to finance wagon trains of individuals from the eastern coast to come to Salt Lake City to settle as Mormons. The only way they got to come is if they were going to be Mormons.
Right.
And so that
We had a restricted immigration policy, yes.
that's exact, and isn't that
Just like
the U.S. has
today.
now.
just like the U.S. has now? And that's one of the interesting things that we always come up with on Conversations Across Time, how much history repeats itself. So you had a restrictive immigration policy. The Transcontinental Railroad, you were involved with the Transcontinental Railroad.
It met right in
Utah.
I'm
And
proud of that.
you're proud of that, but you were not terribly pleased about the fact that now non-Mormons were able to come to Utah to settle.
Wasn't too happy about that.
You were not happy about that.
We had to preserve the integrity of a Latter-day Saints territory because wherever we went that were religious conflicts, we were driven out and we were persecuted. Our founder was taken out of jail and murdered by an angry mob who didn't agree with our beliefs. I had to move from Missouri to Utah because we were being persecuted by the citizens, the Christian citizens of Missouri. So if we allowed non-Latter-day Saint people to infiltrate Utah, the Utah territory, when it came time for statehood, they would have gained control of the government and we would have been persecuted again.
I think
None of
that
them
the
said
theories that are in play, but comparing the two of us are quite different. The church in the black community was the place where we all came together. It was a place of refuge, a place of communion and also connection. So when we're speaking of the church and politics, it is our belief that there is no distinction between the sacred and secular, that there is a common aspect of life, and we must live in these both of these places equally. So we used our position to be able to help people, and the people that we helped became loyal to our cause, and our cause was energized by those people of their own free will based on our relationship having helped them, having brought them up. We spoke in a language that had not been spoken, and it was clear that things needed to be said. The church was used as a gathering point and not as a tool of coercion.
Might not
Well,
be
I'm sure
so
you're
bad.
aware that our founder and our leader, Joseph Smith, ran for president of the United States.
And he was in the process of doing that
Yeah,
when the lynch mob got
exactly.
him and murdered him.
Exactly.
And I, anytime you talk about lynching, I'm genetically predisposed to have a problem with that. So I don't think that the way that the Church of Latter-day Saints was treated by the majority population was something I find abhorrent.
It's terrible.
It's terrible.
It's an interesting thing to me as I listen to Mr. Young that the concept of having the church affect the psyche and the morals of the political sphere, that's something that we had in common with somewhat of a different set of ends in mind. Mm-hmm. But it is clear that the church must be a voice in the political space. Again, the sacred and the secular are mythically divided. They are actually the same. We move in continuum between the two. And the church then must influence with a righteous voice these things that must happen in our society.
The point is that separation of church and state doesn't mean the church can't participate in the democratic process.
But does it mean that that people's religion is being violated if they are
that's
told to a third party is going to offer birth control to their employees?
Well, that's a slippery slope legal question. But what I'm contending is, as long as the laws do not infringe upon the rights of people to worship or to practice their religion.
Which might have to do with using birth control.
It might. I'm saying that's a slippery legal slope. Then religion can do anything it wants in terms of the political arena.
And the fact that that's why the Mormons ended up in Utah, because they were escaping religious persecution. So you didn't have disdain for them. You wanted to find out exactly what they were talking about.
Yes, I thought their theology was quite odd. However, I did not condemn them as bad people just by that. I wanted to hear, as you say, their side of the story, and I published it. I mean, that so that people in the rest of the community could think and judge the Mormon Church for themselves. However, there are people who automatically believe that because this certain group of people does not worship as they do, they're automatically evil. And
But in this country, we have dedicated how many hundreds of years since we wrote the Constitution to fighting that stereotype, that we say to people, welcome. And we're in a situation now which is, I mean, not yet as horrible as what
you
Wells witnessed, which where she had to convince people that lynchings actually happened, and then she had to convince people that it was wrong to lynch somebody who was innocent, even if that person happened not to be Caucasian.
What's interesting?
So what a struggle you had.
And I was getting ready to say, Ms. Wells, the thing that's so interesting to me is that you did this when other reporters didn't want, there were men that told you to try to keep you quiet, to say that it was a danger. And yet you went in and out of these places where these lynchings were happening and were fearless in expressing that it was wrong and that it had actually happened, because they were, at that time, people didn't believe that something like that could happen. So, I mean, I just, first of all, I want to compliment you, but I also want to say, what was your motivation when you saw everyone else running away from the fire, that you actually ran toward it?
Because I grew up with these people. This has been my community since I was born. I was born to slaves. And you have to remember that I did what I did because I felt that it was my responsibility to make sure that I am getting this information as a publisher, even as a person, to make sure that I am getting this information out here. Because if everyone is running away from the fire, that means nobody is telling the truth. Nobody is reporting that these acts, these lynchings are happening to men that most times have not created one crime. That they are being dragged out of their houses, they are being dragged out of their stores, for political reasons, they are being hung by trees while people stand there and watch.
It's almost
with
like a
their
circus.
children.
Yes.
And for us as Americans to put all Muslims in the same box, does that mean that I can put all Christians in the same box? Because it was Christians who committed these acts to my community on behalf of Christianity.
I went to a demonstration, and my favorite sign is right along the lines that you're saying. It said, "First they came for the Muslims, and we said, not this time, mothers."
Quite good, quite good.
Very good, very good, because that
So
expresses.
not this time,
No,
so far
we're
as
not
you
going
were
to allow that
concerned,
to
or
happen
you were
again. I'm
concerned,
not
or
going to
either one
allow
of you,
these
not
same
this
things
time.
that have happened in my community that I have been forced to watch my entire life to keep happening. It's my job, and it's the responsibility of the public
Not this time.
to make sure that everyone is continuing to get this information so that we don't have people going into people's houses anymore. We don't have people dragging people out of
We don't have a
businesses
national
that they
identity
have
card that
rightfully
says
owned
what
and
your
say,
religion is.
because you are of this religion, of this color, of this gender, you are not a real person, and I cannot support you, and you need to leave.
That's one of the things that fascism, that's one of the elements of fascism.
Right, but one of the things you have to credit Ms. Wells for is that she was involved in rights for a lot of different causes. She didn't just limit herself to the anti-lynching crusade. She understood that in order for it to be a true democracy and to stem the tide of oppression and fascism, you had to fight for the rights of all people. So she was strong and very influential in the anti-lynching complaint, but she also was really strong and also advocating women's rights.
Why I take a little bit of issue. I'm a First Amendment freak, but to say that freedom of speech, freedom of press, sort of say that's all we need, no.
That's why
You gotta have the right to vote.
But that's what he's saying, because Ms. Wells.
And that ties in right with what Ms. Wells did, because
She was a
part of lynching was to discourage people in the African Americans in the South from voting. So that ties right in.
Yes, yes.
Voter suppression, Ms. Wells, is something that is happening now. We have state legislatures moving to suppress the vote of people that they are clear are not going to vote the way they want them to vote.
Which is mostly Democrats and a lot of women and mostly minority members of our society here. And that's what they're at.
And so that's like going full circle back to what you were struggling for the rights of people to vote, for the rights of people to be secure in their person and not have their civil liberties overtaken. Lynching was a big deal, but your understanding that it was necessary for women to get the vote, for women to get the franchise, that's something that when we talk about Ida Wells, people sort of forget that that's one of the things that you championed. You understood that women had to be at the table.
Imagine if we had millions and millions and millions of women marching on Washington and not one of them could vote.
That's there you have it.
Yes,
Imagine that.
Yes, I agree that would be a futile exercise. I have been through my paper, have been very active in advocating for women's suffrage, which was quite a radical concept at the time. And also,
when has women's suffrage been new? I thought women have been suffering throughout all of history.
Yes, we have.
Mr. Spartacus is a more formal term for voting.
Voting.
Yes.
That's okay.
But
They let them wait. You vote now?
We
Yes,
vote.
You vote?
Yes, I'm very regular.
Even you could vote now.
I can vote.
Now, even you, if you were around now, Spartacus, once you became a free man.
Can I vote now?
Well, Trump said you could vote now. Trump said there were 3 million people like you that voted.
Maybe I did and I didn't notice.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That could be it. Maybe I did vote and I just didn't
right.
find out about it.
Or at least somebody, we'll have to check, we'll have to have a federal investigation into the voter rolls to see if Spartacus' name was taken off the rolls and did somebody come in and say they were Spartacus and voted.
You know what he should do?
Also
There
an
are people
immigrant,
who-
so I'm not sure if you would be able to vote.
There are people in the Trump administration
Very
that
good.
regret
That's true.
women's suffrage, that think women should not be allowed to vote.
But what's interesting is that during your
Because they want to grab them somewhere, isn't
Yes,
that
that's
right?
right.
They would
shouldn't
prefer to
vote.
grab
They
them
just feel-
rather
should
than
have
have
my
them
pussy
vote.
hat on.
Right,
Yes.
right.
And
You know that there's now pussy hats
Yeah.
they have little ears,
well, I want
to
to tell you
commemorate
something.
How do you keep them on?
ties around the neck.
Ties around, but I want to
Because
tell
it
you
would
something
seem like it would
interesting.
slip right off.
Ties around the neck.
What
No.
two things I want to tell you
Spartacus,
that's interesting.
Spartacus.
That was very interesting today.
I'm
on my-
Spartacus.
Yes, I'm Spartacus. But today on my way to the studio, I saw a little girl and she had on a pussy hat, a purple pussy hat. And she was so cute. And I said to her, oh, I love your hat. And she said, it's a statement.
Well, that's
and,
cool.
and I'm telling you, I don't think she was 5 years old. It was so adorable. She said, it's a statement. So the one thing that has happened is that now women who didn't understand the danger of this man that resides in the White House, I cannot bring myself to call him a president, but then he couldn't call President Obama, so why should I have to call him, why should I have to put president in front of his name? But at any rate, I just think that women are now understanding the significance of them participating in the battle. But during your time, Mr. Spartacus, what I found interesting is that you traveled with thousands of soldiers, and the women were welcome because they were part of the camp. I guess there was a strategy to that because you didn't have to have family leaves because the women were present. But I applaud you for at least incorporating women into the rebellion to make them part of the struggle. That's how your men were able to stay and battle the way that they did because they could go back to a campsite and there were women doing important chores and being spies.
There's some very important chores that they did.
Yes, feeding people.
We didn't need, see, that's one of the things that people don't realize, that there were some soldiers with helmets, very few, they stole them sometimes, but almost none of us had hats. So we had to figure out other ways to stay warm.
And the warmth would come from the females being in the camp. I think it's important that a lot of times when you hear stories about what was going on, they never talk about the role of women. Just like we've got someone in the White House right now that doesn't understand the significance of women.
Yes, I must point out that I have been very instrumental in forming the Republican Party. As a matter of fact, I have been attributed to naming it the Republican Party. And it had this strong element of dedicated abolitionists and free soilers. And I believe Mr. Lincoln would be quite appalled by what has happened to his party.
How it's disintegrated into a party of hatred?
Yes, how the same people who Mr. Lincoln emancipated are being targeted with abuse by this same party. And I've always tried to do that in my campaigns. And I've also run for office now and again.
But the thing that I hear from you and I hear from Ms. Wells is the importance and the obligation of the media. You see, we're talking now about the fact that the media has failed this country.
That's true.
And here you two sit and you're witnessing through time travel, which is a concept that you must accept if you're watching this show. But we are witnessing now the reluctance of the media to educate, as Ms. Wells is saying, to give the information so that people can make informed decisions. It's just not there.
Yes.
Could I say, I remember watching over and over again media reports of the congressional investigation of Secretary Clinton over the incident that happened in Benghazi when four of our people were murdered. Anybody here, and I'm going to ask the audience to think about this. Yes, it was a tragedy. It was horrible. How many people, not counting 9/11, how many people attached to embassies were murdered during the Bush administration? I give you 5 seconds. I bet you Mr. Paine knows the answer. How many people were murdered, Americans and people associated during the Bush administration? Depending on how you count, 60 or 65.
More than that.
How many investigations did the Republicans hold? 0. And every time there was a broadcast about Benghazi, I'd be incensed because the media didn't say, we're now investigating Benghazi. Guess what? 65 people were killed under the last administration and they never investigated anything. Okay, back to Benghazi.
We all
Nobody knows that because the media didn't bring it.
They know it now.
Even I
that's
did.
What we do.
I would never put in any of my pamphlets that George was anything but bad.
King George.
Yeah, King George III.
So many Georges.
Yes.
There were a lot of.
And it seems like every time.
Yes.
Yes.
And I'm sure Mr. Greeley felt the same way, about he would never ever say anything good about the institution of slavery. Not that there can be anything good about it, but Southerners try to defend it in a different way. The problem with the media today is they don't expose anything. And the best example I can give you, and from my perch again in hell or heaven, the investigation into Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's email was covered ad nauseum forever and ever and ever. At the same time, the New York Times had information about the Russians hacking and influencing the American election, and they published nothing about it at the time. And then this leads to the director of the FBI, Mr. Comey, coming out and talking about, even though he said she's exonerated and this and that, and then we're doing a further investigation, just keeping it in the public eye and having our press, who should be objective, covering it that way, and Mr. Comey not saying anything about the Russian hacking and the influence on the election. What the New York Times reporter should have said at that press conference, or they should have printed, I would have put out a pamphlet immediately saying, Mr. Comey, why did you omit any information about the Russian hacking? Now, he could say, I don't want to influence politics in the election, but the fact that he did, not one journalist, and that was all over the news before it came out later on, we talked, I watched the show where I think it was one of the judges was talking about it when I was up in heaven watching Conversations Across Time on Tuesday night. One of the judges was talking about the influence on the election, and not one newspaper, big newspaper, not one cable news network reported it, and that may have very well doomed our country.
I want to tell you something that's interesting about that. When you say that they didn't report it, I find it insulting that finally they have stopped using these euphemisms. That doesn't, when they would say, when one of the minions from Trump was on being broadcast, they would say things like, the reporter would say, well, you know, that's not factual. That doesn't have a basis in fact. They never called these people liars. I'm looking into this camera today and I am saying to you, stop focusing on Donald Trump. Anything that comes out of his mouth is going to be a lie because the man's a liar. And why was the press so reluctant to call this man a liar?
Because he's a reality TV star, and we also have to realize what's happening in our society today, that even though the media has a responsibility to report the news, we also have this obsession with people's lives. So here you have this reality
Obsession
TV.
with your bottom line, I think.
You have this man who has been all over our news that is less than mediocre, and now he's running for president without telling the people who he is, and that's two completely different things. Showing the people, well, one of the things that I've said to people repeatedly about what's happening with the President of the United States right now is he said that he was going to do all of these things, yet you voted for him, and now you're upset about it. He said it, though.
Yes,
we have to acknowledge
he
said it. So,
do you think it's that they thought it was so ridiculous when he said it that he wouldn't do it?
It doesn't matter. He ran on that platform.
Yes.
He said this was what he was going to do. You decided to vote for him based on what he was going to do. Now we are in the position where we are in, where we are talking about, has the media failed us? The media failed us because they did not challenge him. They did not fact check anything that he said, and that's why we are here right now having this conversation.
Let me ask this, because the media allowed him to tell these lies. We know, even back to Horace Publicus, the fact that merchants were underwriting the news. You see, many years ago, when CBS first started, I mean, we got to talk about Moonves, who said he doesn't care what Donald Trump, he said, I'm going to paraphrase, it doesn't matter what Donald Trump says because he's a rating boom. He's a rating bonanza for CBS. That's what they were responding to. They were responding to money. They were responding to the bottom line, which is what Babette just alluded to. Your calling, Mr. Greeley's calling, Mr. Paine's calling was for a higher. You valued this country more and truth more.
Because even like you said in the beginning, during Spartacus's time, there was someone who is reporting what shop has the best bread, what shop has the best
was
produce,
mercantile
but
rights.
that was paid for. In our time right now, that is still paid for. We have to understand, well, who are the sponsors to these networks?
The grain merchant can't fail the grain buyer by telling the grain buyer where to buy bread. You're expecting something that will never happen.
Expect the media, and then we have to do it.
But they can influence him in the sense that, and Donald Trump's lies go way back even before he might have had in his mind to run for president, when he lied about President Obama's legitimacy and being born as an American citizen in Hawaii. And even though the press covered it, they allowed him to go on hundreds of shows, throwing that garbage out there. Now, they might have said, well, Mr. Trump, what evidence do you have? Or what proof? He said, well, he has no proof anyway. He has to show his birth certificate. And finally, President Obama did show his birth certificate. He said, well, then it's phony. And then it's now to keep covering them, what they should have said is, this is bogus. We know it's bogus. We know he was an American citizen. We know he's a legitimate president. If you want to be on our show, we don't want to talk about that.
We have Mr. Thomas Paine giving you information on what is common sense, calling a liar a liar. And for your use, we are going to put up some telephone numbers of the congressional switchboards so that you can call your representatives and call them out. When is a liar a liar? Pick up the phone and you do something about it.
Conversations across time.